Do you know who holds the most intimate secrets of Britain's entertainment elite? It's not the paparazzi, but the master tailors on Savile Row and the costume departments. They are the rare few who have to sweat bullets trying to hide the massive endowments of these male gods beneath exquisitely tailored suits. Behind the stiff upper lip, refined English demeanor, the underground gay scene in London quietly whispers a much rawer truth. In an era of strict censorship, private parties and dressing rooms became the real arenas where true power was displayed. Stories about the hidden giant or sizes that could overwhelm any lover have always been the favorite gossip among the upper class. Setting aside the glittering awards for a moment today, we are going to peel back the layers of aristocratic veneer to reveal the 13 British actors who possess the greatest endowments in the history of cinema. Hit subscribe right now and let's begin with the first one. 1. Ivor Novello, the romantic king and the wonder that ruled West End. In the 1920s, West End was not just a glittering street in London, it was a kingdom. And the uncrowned king of that kingdom was Ivor Novello. Every night when the red velvet curtain rose, his seductive smile and lovesick gaze were enough to pierce the hearts of thousands of female audience members. They screamed. They worshipped him as the ultimate standard of romantic masculinity. But behind the blazing footlights after the makeup was removed, Novello stepped into a completely different world, a parallel life where he immersed himself in passionate affairs with talented young men whom he himself discovered and nurtured. Novello's secret was not only his sexuality. In the narrow corridors of the West End theater world at that time, people secretly passed around a private nickname for him, the Welsh Wonder. That nickname didn't come from his singing voice or composing talent, but from a very obvious physical attribute, something that even the most elaborate costumes in his grand musicals couldn't fully conceal. In Novello's dressing room before every performance, there was always a strange tension in the air. Assistants tiptoed around and a private tailor was always on standby. Emergency alterations were routine. They had to measure cut and create special undergarments on the spot. Novello's endowment was a real challenge for the costume designers. The tight trousers of that era simply couldn't contain such enormity. Without the intervention of the tailoring team, his romantic, dramatic performances could easily have turned into an embarrassing onstage scandal. Novello was fully aware of the attention his body attracted. He wasn't afraid of it. On the contrary, he treated it as a mischievous joke from nature. During lavish private parties filled with cigar smoke at his Savoy apartment, Novello would lounge in a leather chair, gently swirling his champagne glass, and look around at his gay friends with a half-smile, "I write music" to hide something else. The whole room would burst into laughter, while a few faces turned red and looked away. They knew exactly what he was talking about. Novello's talent was turning his sweet romantic roles into the perfect disguise. On stage, he was a passionate lover. Off stage, it was his way of avoiding the judgment of a society that could destroy him if the truth came out. He used his fame to conceal what he could never publicly admit. When Novello passed away in 1951, London was plunged into mourning with thousands of fans grieving. But in more private circles, people quietly raised their glasses, bidding farewell to a legend and the secrets that were never spoken aloud. But if Novello used romance as a smokescreen to hide his wonder, the next figure used a much sharper weapon, a man who wielded biting wit to slap prejudice right in the face. 3. Laurence Olivier, the Shakespearean master and the endowment that forced Vivien Leigh to share. When people mention Laurence Olivier, they immediately picture a god of acting. With his powerful physique, chiseled features, and thunderous voice, he was born to portray Shakespeare's kings. And when he married Vivien Leigh, the dazzling Scarlett O'Hara of Hollywood, the world believed they were witnessing the most perfect love story of all time. A glamorous marriage painted so beautifully it was almost blinding. But inside that fairy tale castle, the walls were cracking because of a secret that could never be spoken aloud. According to what Noel Coward once recorded, Vivien Leigh, in a moment of utter frustration and helplessness, cried and whispered to a close female friend, "Lawrence's endowment is so large that I have to share him with both sexes." That was the bitter pain of a woman who realized she could never fully possess the man she loved. Olivier possessed an overwhelming primal magnetism, not just with women, but with men around him as well. During long tours amid cigar smoke and alcohol, especially when working with Michael Redgrave, the private aspects of his life gradually surfaced. In the backstage world, Olivier was spoken of as a monument of British theater. His powerful presence created an influence that was hard to name, drawing many young actors closer, partly in admiration, partly out of curiosity about the man behind the spotlight. However, that great endowment didn't just bring pleasure, it also created real problems on stage. Shakespearean costumes, especially tight tights and short doublets that revealed every contour of the lower body. There was one occasion when a famous director had to furiously order an emergency redesign of Olivier's entire costume right before showtime. The reason Olivier was simply too big, it was impossible to hide under the thin fabric. The director was terrified that the audience would ignore Shakespeare's poetic tragedy and instead fix their eyes on the weapon threatening to burst through the classical costume. Olivier lived his entire life on the tightrope between truth and lies. A great legend, a symbol of heterosexual masculinity in the newspapers, yet forced to use a lavender marriage, a tear-soaked arranged union with Vivian Leigh to conceal the wild desires that the stage lights would never dare shine directly upon. 4. John Gielgud, the public toilet scandal and the secret that could not be hidden. In 1953, Britain was shaken when shocking news flooded the headlines. Sir John Gielgud, the towering knight of British theatre, had been arrested. Not for political or financial scandal, but for being caught in a public toilet in Chelsea on charges of importuning soliciting homosexual acts. The incident didn't just cause a cultural earthquake, it nearly ended the career of anyone in that era when the law still hunted homosexuals like criminals. But for Gielgud, the greatest terror that night wasn't just the destruction of his reputation. Few people know that the incident in that disinfectant-smelling public toilet nearly exposed a physical secret he had worked so hard to hide for decades. Behind the image of a dignified intellectual gentleman, Gielgud possessed an endowment of astonishing size. When the police caught him in the dark, cramped space of that public toilet, his great endowment nearly became fully exposed in front of the authorities, something that, if leaked, would have turned him into the most humiliating laughingstock in the tabloids. He had to use every last ounce of his acting composure, hiding behind his Shakespearean reputation to desperately cling to the final thin veil covering his body. The contrast between the knight standing under the bright lights of the National Theatre and a man secretly seeking pleasure in a public toilet created a profound psychological tragedy. In his private letters, yellowed with age and sealed for 70 years, Gielgud poured out his anguish to an anonymous lover, admitting the cruel contradiction of fate. "My body is the greatest gift God has given me, but it is also the heaviest burden." 5. Alec Guinness, the silver screen saint and the secret behind the monk's robe. On screen, Alec Guinness always appeared calm, almost otherworldly. From philosophical characters to the wise Jedi Master, he radiated the aura of someone above worldly chaos. In 1956, his conversion to Catholicism was praised as a spiritual journey in search of peace. But behind that devout exterior was not purely a quest for salvation, but the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he carried. In the underground gay circles of London at the time, where gentlemen could temporarily shed all social norms and live truthfully, this refined actor was given a suggestive private nickname, the Hidden Giant. Few suspected that behind his slender frame lay something that made others both curious and speechless. Aware of his advantage, Guinness turned it into a form of discreet power. On set, his half-smile always carried something elusive, as if he held a secret no one could touch, and that very fact kept him in a unique position. The most famous anecdote about him came from a steamy private sauna in central London. When a close friend accidentally pushed open the door while Guinness had just removed his towel, even the thick steam was powerless against the overwhelming reality. The friend stood frozen, staggered backward, and nearly fainted. It was the moment the truth exploded, fully revealing the asset Guinness had always quietly kept to himself. This quiet confidence also influenced his choice of roles. Guinness frequently appeared as priests, monks, or characters in flowing robes. Those costumes not only created a solemn appearance, but also served as the perfect cover, helping him maintain distance from prying eyes. On the outside, calm and disciplined. On the inside, complete control over a secret only he possessed. In the end, it wasn't just how he built his image, it was how he survived in an era full of pressure where concealment was sometimes the only condition for continuing to stand tall. 6. Dirk Bogarde, the perfect beauty and the secret lover of 40 years. If Hollywood had Cary Grant, Britain had Dirk Bogarde. With his sculpted face, deep eyes, and the elegant demeanor of a true English gentleman, Bogarde became the dream of millions of young women. He was a box office magnet and the very definition of flawless sophistication. In front of the press, Bogart always maintained a restrained smile, a tightly closed private life, and firmly denied all rumors about his sexuality. But behind the closed doors of his villa, he lived a different life, quietly sharing his existence as a life partner with actor Anthony Forwood for more than 4 decades. Bogart's concealment wasn't just to avoid the press or fans. His private life and very personal advantages actually brought him to the attention of far more dangerous forces. When MI5 files were declassified, it was revealed that he had been targeted by the KGB. In the Cold War context, private matters were no longer personal. They could become weaknesses to be exploited or controlled. Fully aware of the risks, Bogart chose absolute silence and self-control. He built an airtight facade where every action and word was carefully calculated. But no matter how well he hid it, the physical presence of his great endowment was something that could not be denied. During intimate romantic scenes, the cold, detached, gentlemanly facade Bogart worked so hard to maintain was often betrayed by his own body. More than a few leading actresses of the era, when performing close embraces or tight dance scenes with him, would suddenly blush deeply, their hearts racing. They felt an overwhelming physical pressure, a raw, intense reality completely at odds with that cold, sexless image he tried to project. Bogart spent his entire career playing the role of a pure angel, while hiding a giant demon of lust beneath his perfectly pressed trousers. And 7. Terence Stamp, the most beautiful boy of the 1960s and the secret that made Hollywood nervous. If one had to pick a single face to represent the rebellion, wildness, and almost hypnotic beauty of the 1960s, the name would undoubtedly be Terence Stamp. With piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight into your soul, razor-sharp jawline, and a half-smile capable of bending every moral boundary, Stamp was the living embodiment of an Adonis who had fallen into foggy London. Women craved him. Men wanted to be him. Yet behind that flawless beauty lay a colossal physical truth, a secret so enormous it made the entire film industry break into a cold sweat. Stamp's beauty did not stop at the surface of his skin. A legendary leading actress who had the chance to work with him in London once couldn't hold back and blurted out during a private interview. Stamp isn't just beautiful. On the outside, he possesses something that makes even the boldest American movie stars blush bright red when they accidentally stand too close. That statement was like a spark that set fire to the image of a fragile young man, revealing someone completely different, powerful, overwhelming, and full of raw instinct. Stamp's endowment was so large that it became a technical nightmare, a logistical headache for any director who worked with him. In the 1960s, when image censorship standards were still very strict, filming with Stamp required constant improvisation. Directors had to yell instructions to change camera angles on the spot, adjust lighting immediately, all to avoid shots that would clearly reveal the massive size beneath his trousers. The costume department worked frantically, constantly intervening, re-sewing crotch seams, or adding thick layers of padding to restrain the endowment that threatened to break the frame. However, if Terence Stamp's asset was a wild display that left entire film crews drenched in sweat trying to contain it, then in the kingdom of Hollywood, there stood another icon who knew how to wrap and manipulate his greatness with an even more regal elegance. 8. Cary Grant, the perfect English gentleman and the Bachelor Hall secret. If there is one name forever framed in the definition of absolute sophistication on the silver screen, it can only be Cary Grant. He was the ideal that every man in America secretly wanted to copy. Those expensive hand-tailored suits that hugged his perfect figure seemed born to celebrate the standard of male elegance. Yet Cary Grant was hiding a private life and personal secrets powerful enough to shake the very image of propriety that Hollywood was desperately trying to build. While other male stars tried to bury their sexuality in the darkest corners, Grant openly shared his life and his bed with actor Randolph Scott. They moved in together into a luxurious villa by the sea in Malibu, a place that journalists and insiders at the time mockingly called Bachelor Hall. In front of the cameras, they were cheerful bachelors sharing rent. But when night fell and the heavy oak gates closed, that villa became a private kingdom of unrestrained indulgence. At exclusive all-male parties for Hollywood's elite, Grant and Scott were always the brightest center of attention. The focus on them wasn't just because of their fame, but because of a legend that circulated wildly in backstage circles about their shared great endowment. Their physical assets were so massive that during one smoke-filled cigar party, a close friend couldn't resist making a crude joke. If the two of you stand next to each other, the whole room has to clear space to make room. That joke laid bare a raw physical reality beneath the refined, gentlemanly exterior. Grant carried a weapon capable of crushing any standard. The irony of Hollywood was this: they were willing to sacrifice an artist's true self to protect image and profit. Under pressure from studio bosses, Cary Grant was forced into carefully arranged marriages designed to erase any suspicion surrounding his private life. He married and divorced multiple times, each one like another scene in a larger script. To the public, he remained the elegant gentleman, the perfect lover. But behind that image was a clear separation between the role he played and the man he truly was. Grant used his fame, his relationships, and all his personal constraints to build an almost impenetrable facade, a performance that lasted his entire life to protect what he could never publicly reveal. Glamour could cover up nights of endless debauchery, but sometimes physical secrets would shatter in the most cruel and painful way right at the most sacred moment of a lifetime. 9. Charles Laughton, The Frankenstein Monster, and the Heartbreaking Lavender Marriage. In the 1930s, Charles Laughton appeared as a giant with a rough, bulky body, yet he possessed a brilliant mind and an incredibly sensitive soul. When actress Elsa Lanchester accepted his marriage proposal, the media painted a poetic love story between Beauty and the Beast. Elsa believed she was entrusting her life to a true soulmate. However, the honeymoon that seemed so peaceful was shattered by a shocking confession, turning the rest of their lives into an invisible prison. Right in the early days of their marriage, Charles Laughton broke down. Tormented by guilt and his own difference, he confessed everything from his homosexuality to the inner urges he could not control. But for Elsa, the tragedy did not end there. She bitterly admitted, "Our impasse is not just about sexuality. There are things in this marriage that are beyond my ability to endure, and I know I will never be able to overcome them." The size of that thing was so large that every attempt at physical intimacy turned into pain and horror. Elsa was forced to accept a brutal pact and open marriage. For 33 long years living under the title of husband and wife, they never once had a real marital sex life. Elsa became the faithful gatekeeper, quietly watching her husband drift into homosexual affairs, hiding for him the endowment that was both a man's pride and a death sentence for their marriage. The irony extended from real life all the way onto the film set. When Laughton transformed into the tyrannical king in The Private Life of Henry VIII or the deformed hunchback in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the costume department faced an unsolvable problem. Audiences assumed the thick, padding horsehair stuffing and wide crotch designs were meant to create the character's grotesque, bulky shape. In reality, those heavy layers of fabric were the only salvation to restrain the oversized endowment that constantly threatened to break the era's image censorship standards. If Laughton had to rely on horsehair and monstrous disguises to cover the truth, then another silver screen gentleman used intellectual sophistication and silence to lock the wild beast inside himself. 10. James Mason, The Seductive Voice and the Secret Behind the Refined Smile. James Mason was the very definition of intellectual, slightly dangerous seduction. When people mentioned him, the whole world had to bow to his ultimate weapon, his voice. Deep, rich, smooth like black velvet brushing against skin, Mason's voice could hypnotize and crush the audience's mind with just a few rumbling tones. But according to a bombshell revelation from a veteran screenwriter who once lived and worked with him on set, that mesmerizing tone was not a random gift from God. It was the result of an extreme physical restraint, a constant tensing to suppress the enormous piece of flesh waiting to explode beneath his waist. Unlike his calm appearance, often associated with fallen aristocrats or philosophical villains, Mason lived a secretly fiery homosexual love life. During private getaways on sun-drenched Mediterranean islands, far from the prying lenses of the media, the gentlemanly facade was torn apart. In the closed circle of his male lovers, Mason was not honored with acting titles. They whispered among themselves, venerating him with a name soaked in lust.
It was a hidden power that created an eerily contrasting effect with his restraining. That massive legacy required horrifying psychological and physical effort. He always kept his body in a deliberately tense state, adjusting his posture, breathing rhythm. The very compression from his lower body pushed his breath up into his chest, resonating into his larynx to create that. He used the very danger of a man hiding a colossal weapon to sculpt the most seductive villain roles in film history, leaving the whole world trapped in inescapable fascination.
From his lower body pushed his breath upward into his chest and larynx, creating that deep, resonant, commanding voice. James Mason had turned the burden of his body into the highest art of concealment.
That restraint created a profound and quiet James Mason. But for the wild boy from the mining region of Wales, every effort 11. Richard Burton, the Welsh god and the legacy that made. Elizabeth Taylor have to share.
Found in alcohol and madness.
Richard Burton did not step gently into Hollywood. He smashed the door and stormed into the film. His noisy and expensive marriage to Elizabeth Taylor made them one of the most powerful couples in the world. But even a strong woman like Taylor could not keep Burton entirely for herself. Though he appeared in public with a glamorous image, he still did not. Burton's secret was not only in his brief affairs with men, it was also tied to his own body, a natural advantage so prominent that it was hard to fully conceal even in front of the camera. In many situations, that presence became very real, creating clear pressure that costumes or camera angles could not easily. During a full-body shot emphasizing Burton's authority, Elizabeth Taylor, who was sitting and supervising, suddenly slammed the table and shouted for the entire crew to stop filming immediately. She rushed to the director, her face flushed red, and whispered through gritted teeth, and that detail showed clearly under the clothing, creating a crude and off-tone feeling that completely ruined the refinement the scene aimed for.
She rushed to the director, her face flushed, and hissed through gritted teeth in undeniable order. "You guys need to take him to the dressing room and change his costume right now. Richard's endowment is breaking through the frame. It can't be hidden under the lens."
Burton clearly understood what he was carrying, and he also knew how society would react if his private life was exposed. The pressure of having to maintain the image of the most, drinking to the point of destroying his liver and lungs and turning his body into a fermenting wine jar. Alcohol was the only anesthetic that helped him temporarily numb the raging flesh, helping him forget the terrible burden of having to act 24 hours a day.
Burton turned to alcohol, not out of habit, but out of despair. He drank whiskey instead of water, consuming it to the point of destroying his liver and lungs.
Burton withered away at the peak of his fame, crushed by his own great legacy, and the secrets he never dared to speak aloud.
Burden of having to act 24 hours a day.
All the stories above reflect a common truth behind the stage lights. And the glamour of fame are people forced. The legacy that people are curious about is not simply a matter of the body, but a symbol of what they had to hide, control, and struggle to carry. Some used romance, some used intellect. Some chose silence, but all shared one single goal: survival. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not those secrets themselves, but the fact that they had to carry them to the end of their lives, never able to live fully even while the whole world stood up to applaud. If you find this story brings you a lot of new information, please hit like to support, subscribe.
And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not in the secrets themselves, but in the fact that they had to carry them to the very end of their lives, never allowed to live fully, even when the whole world stood up to applaud them. If this story gave you a lot of new information, please hit like to support, subscribe, so you don't miss future content. Thank you for watching.